Hey everyone, and welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 3 cheat sheet. We're going to be doing a deep dive into Game Week 3 because I think this is a very interesting week where a lot of people have rolled their first free transfers and can now actually make very powerful 2 free transfer opportunities. You also have now the option of even at this advanced early stage, I think this is the first real consideration of a wildcard opportunity because you can actually effectively have saved your first free transfer. Maybe your team's in a lot more trouble than 1 free transfer, 2 free transfers can sort of solve. And you can actually continue to sort of build a team and a template that you like now, and then sort of reevaluate how you plan to make moves in the future when there are fixture swings. So that's something interesting. But the key point, of course, is that there has been a lot of movement and we have 2 game weeks of information now. So double the amount of information we had last week. And that's the starting position. The cheat sheet series, if you've never watched it before, is a series where we actually look at all the price points in FPL and all the positions and sort of rate the assets based on their future run of games. Not just the next 3, but the next 5, maybe even 8, with obviously less consideration towards the future ones. And then just generally considering as well tactical changes and the data so far, plus of course the historical one, which I put a lot more weight towards. So before we get started with the cheat sheet, I'd like to shout out Fantasy Football Hub. A lot of the sort of interpretation of the data was actually done with a lot of the advanced data on their website. Have a look at Fantasy Football Hub and their website because they still have a 50% offer in place, which will still last towards the Game Week 3 deadline. And you can use it to actually improve your rank as an FPL manager and increase your FPL experience exponentially. So let's just jump into the midfield position. I think Rodgers is still just an amazing pick. He's gotten a price rise now, but that doesn't really stop him from being amazing. The fact is, a lot of the players, in my opinion, below the 6.5 million position are a little bit iffy in the sense that it's quite hard to consistently play some of these players. And I feel like Rodgers is creeping into that territory where, based on what I'm watching from Aston Villa so far, and maybe this will change during the Champions League where he might get rotated in and out a little bit more in terms of minutes, but he seems like a crucial player to this team. He's effectively a second striker, and I do like the pivot right now of Onana and Tielemans. I think there's a lot of balance in this Aston Villa team, and he's very clearly a key part of the offense compared to what he was last season. So whilst the underlying data from the previous year was quite poor, I think you can give him the benefit of the doubt because he's a young, developing player. The second point is that I think he has a much more key defined role within the team, and the 2 sample size, which is obviously extremely small of data, is very good so far. But he looks promising. And if you're watching him play, even more so. With Amad Diallo, the issue and why I haven't given him a rise is because I still think that Garnacho can find himself back into the starting team. However, we're starting to see a little bit more rotation in place. It's not necessarily the case that Rashford is a 19-minute man. We're starting to see Rashford substitutions for Garnacho. And Ahmad's actually getting very, very good minutes. The question, I suppose, is does that continue? And can you sort of chance that every single week? And I feel like that's the small issue because now that you're coming off of 2 nice fixtures for Game Weeks 1 and 2, you're entering a tough fixture here in Game Week 3 for United and then questioning what the minutes are. I feel like there's too much doubt in the Ahmad minutes. At least I can't call it myself, even though he's clearly going to be a key part of the season, which is why I still have to keep him as a differential. In the 5.5 tier and above, no changes. I feel like my thoughts on these players were very clear. I think the positions that they play in their teams are also very clear. Smith Rowe, Minte, Semenyo have always been near the top of my cheat sheet because I do rate these players and the minutes that they play. With Minte, I think he arguably has the least amount of minutes when everyone is available with Brighton because they simply have that much more depth. With Smith Rowe, it's a different situation where clearly we know that the reason why he's playing less minutes is simply because he needs to get up to full match fitness. Now, he's come off the best game within the run here in terms of Leicester at home. The next 3 are still amazing. So I think Smith Rowe is a very easy pick to jump into if you haven't already. But I can understand a lot of managers maybe actually looking towards the long view. So after Game Weeks 3, 4, and 5, it's not like the fixtures for Fulham get much better, right, after Game Week 6. So if you're thinking a little bit longer term now, Smith Rowe is actually a very stable pick because if you want to just rotate between the 5.5 million players, that's fine. But if you want like a solidified spot in the team, I'm not sure if it actually makes that much sense to, let's say, have multiple 5.x players, right? I think it makes a lot more sense long term to only have one of these players in the draft, and you might have to be considering with someone like Rodgers in the future. With Minte, you simply have 1 bad fixture versus Arsenal, and then it's all steam ahead. However, one of the things I would say with Minte is, once again, Brighton have a lot of depth available, so he's nailed towards a 78-minute substitution. What I have noticed that is very interesting so far is that he's taking some set pieces, more so than I actually thought. So you're seeing Minte on indirect free kicks. You're also seeing him as a second taker in direct free kicks as well, based on what I can see. And that's very promising, because what does that always tell us? Just more avenues towards FPL points. So I do like Minte a lot. Semenyo, the minutes are absolutely nailed in right wing. Of course, the dream of a center forward at 5.5 in the midfield is gone, but that's totally fine. The reality is, as probably Bournemouth's most productive attacker, most consistent player in terms of minutes, you're not really losing out on much by going Semenyo. He's a very, very good pick, and he remains the case. Andreas Pereira, Brereton Diaz, same sort of value, I think, over these players. We're getting close towards the end of the window, but I think it's also obvious now that Andreas Pereira is probably not going to be as advanced as you'd like as a player. We also have some uncertainty around the penalty aspect of him, and I think that is a lot of the value within Andreas Pereira. So once the games get a little bit worse, he's probably going to dissipate a little bit in the cheat sheet. Brereton Diaz, we haven't seen a great Southampton so far. I think if anything, they look like a much better defensive team compared to offense. And then the question, of course, is, does Brereton Diaz continue to get good minutes? Because Southampton are also buying some more attackers. I think at 70-75 minutes, Brereton Diaz is actually a very decent pick, considering the kind of run that you have. So if you've already invested into Brereton Diaz, you should be holding him, in my opinion, at least until Ipswich at home. But after that, there's a question, of course, where maybe we have a little bit of a change in understanding of his minutes, and also just a change in understanding on Southampton and exactly how impotent they are on offense. I'm not ready to sort of turn the page immediately, because yes, of course, they haven't scored in 2 games so far, but I find it very far-fetched to believe that they won't score at all. In the 6.5 position, what's interesting is I still think Bailey is up there, and he's a very easy hold for managers now who are looking at the full run of games ahead. His minutes are never going to be, I think, close towards the 90 minutes. He's also going to be playing in Champions League. But the reality is, of course, Bailey is a very productive player, even with reduced minutes, and that's why he's one of the top picks. With Sobo, I've actually added him, but I think my small doubt is what happens during the Champions League. If Liverpool actually rotate a bit more, and you see someone like Harvey Elliott, who's clearly the sort of second choice 10 within the team, who actually hasn't gotten a sniff of time so far, I guess the question is, does Sobo just play all these games? And if he does, I think he's just an amazing pick. Simply because Liverpool actually just look like a wonderful team. I wouldn't say necessarily he looks like, you know, a completely free, unshackled 10, like let's say Cole Palmer. The reality is he does have almost a dual role for the team. A lot of his sort of role, it takes part in build-up as well, which is not something that a lot of classic 10s have to do, or free roaming 10s have to do. However, at 6.5 million, it's very hard to sort of miss out on a pick like that, particularly when the minutes look so good as they are so far. But you also have to have a little bit of faith, I think, once again, in understanding what the interrelation is with, let's say, Harvey Elliott's minutes when Champions League is around. And I think maybe I'm overestimating Sobo so far, but I think I've been impressed enough to say that I think he deserves a huge rise. But Madueke, I think this comes with a big piece of doubt, because we saw him benched in Game Week 1. Now, he had a fantastic performance in Game Week 2, also generally a good performance overall within the European match, which probably actually garnered him the start in Game Week 2 versus Wolves. The reality is, when you've scored a hat-trick, I mean, what can I say? I mean, you're probably going to start for the next few matches, potentially. And I'm sure Enzo's going to find it hard to bench him, because another aspect, too, to sort of playing Madueke right wing is that you can play Cole Palmer as the 10, and he's brilliant at it. Which obviously means that Nkunku has left the cheat sheet as well, because that's sort of the position that we thought Nkunku could play alongside left wing, maybe even almost like a midfield-like position as well. The reality is, Chelsea have so many attackers. It seems like they're still going to buy more attackers, and I think there's a bit of risk that comes from Madueke. Not necessarily in the sense that Madueke is, going to get benched or something on the weekend, but the case is, how long can he continue starting? How long can he continue playing 90 minutes? I think there is a bit of doubt there, which is why I'm a little bit less sold on Madueke than some other people are. It's nice as well that he's gotten a price rise, so he's actually just at 6.5. So still within reach for a lot of managers who have probably made the move already from, let's say, Nkunku. With Gibbs White, I have to say he's a good transfer for a lot of managers, but you do have to admit that there are some bad fixtures in the distance. Game weeks 4 and 5 are poor fixtures. So it's an immediately great fixture in Game Week 3, but beyond that, I don't think Gibbs White actually has as much value as we potentially think. With Mitoma, I think I would make the same argument in the sense that he's not someone who's a 90-minute player, I wouldn't say. He's very clearly going to play 78, 80 minutes a game at the bare minimum. But he doesn't have set pieces, and his open play data is good, but it's not overwhelmingly good. So whilst the Brighton fixtures will get better, I think the question, of course, is going to be, is Minte still playing the same amount of minutes? Is João Pedro playing the same amount of minutes? And why wouldn't you go for those options instead and probably prefer some of the other green picks within the field? And I actually think that that's sort of my position right now. If you do want to stack on multiple Brighton attackers, I don't think that there's an issue with going Mitoma necessarily, but those are just my thoughts right now. As far as Savio, he's the only Man City player that I've actually dared to put in so far. And part of that, in my opinion, is once again, if you look at the pecking order, of course, Foden's going to come back into the team in some form, some way, and Savio's going to lose more minutes as a result of that, just by proxy of the amount of attackers that they have on display. Doku, of course, is competing with Grealish, and Savio technically has one less piece of competition in Bob and his injury. So I quite like Savio's great performance in Gaming 2. I feel like he can continue starting for the team. Early subs are probably something that you have to deal with, even some odd benchings. But I just intuitively really like Savio as a player. I've been watching him in La Liga for a long time now, particularly his performances in Girona. I do think also his sort of directness and I think his decision making in the box might be better than Doku. This is a little bit of an eye test assessment as opposed to just purely, how people might think based on looking at the data. But that's sort of my interpretation of Savio as a player, and that's why he enters here as a differential. But I still think that because you're dealing with so much downside in the sense that his minutes can still be poor, there's a huge risk, and that's why he remains a differential. At the 7.0 position, or rather the 6.9 and 7.0 position, if Eze gets his price drop, ultimately I think Eze and Mbeumo are still amazing picks. And there's absolutely no reason why I'd actually really ignore these types of players, because yes, of course, Eze has blanked 2 games so far. Yes, of course, you can say that Crystal Palace have looked poor so far, but the reality is the underlying data for Eze has been really good. So it already suggests that he's continuing to actually put out enough underlying production to actually be able to get the returns that we want from a player at this position, at this price point. Yes, Chelsea away is a bad fixture, but after that, the fixtures remain really good. And because the underlying data still looks really strong for Eze, and we know that he has the intangibles, I can't see why he's worthy of a sell. That's just personally my opinion. And I think the same argument can be held with Mbeumo as well. Mbeumo is definitely strengthened by Tony most likely leaving by the end of the transfer window. If Tony leaves to Chelsea, even better. You think Mbeumo is even more guaranteed. But of course, if Tony remains within the squad and somehow he still, leaves towards the Saudi leagues, which is possible after the deadline as well, because the Saudi transfer window does not close the same time as the Premier League one. That gives a bit more doubt towards Mbeumo. But generally speaking, he's an amazing pick. The fixtures after game week 5 are amazing, but you're also looking at an immediate great game week 3. So I feel like not many managers will actually have the double up of Eze and Mbeumo, and that's fine. But simply put, both of these players are definitely worth staying or being sort of buys within your team for this week. And I think that's just how strong they are as picks. I've not seen anything so far to really change my mind off of either player or either pick, even with what we've seen so far from Crystal Palace and Brentford. With Rashford, he has to drop because clearly we're seeing that there's a bit more rotation than we expected, and there's less of the sort of pecking order priority aspect of things. It's clear he can get subbed off early, and he doesn't have that sort of grace right now, so he obviously has to drop. In the next few positions, the 7.5, there's no changes here. I think this is an amazing fixture for Gordon, but I'm not going to suddenly boost him back up. He's always been someone that I've considered as a 90-minute player. I don't think that changes. I've been talking, even going back to the preseason, that I expected the Murphy right-wing substitution to happen at one point in the season, and we've already started to see a lot of that. So Gordon playing really good minutes, being a good FPL asset, that hasn't changed. With Bowen, we're just waiting until the fixtures get a little bit better with Luis Diaz. I still have to say, of course, Diogo Jota is someone I prefer playing center forward. We need to still see, once again, how Darwin and Gakpo continue to get incorporated within the team, because it's very plausible that maybe after the United fixture that we continue to see really poor Gakpo and Darwin minutes, and that gives us even more comfort in being able to go for players like Jota and go for players like Luis Diaz. For now, I think I'm comfortable sort of keeping them where they're at, because Man United away, even though you can look at Man United and consider them to be a poor team, the reality is this is still an away fixture. This is one of Liverpool's worst fixtures, I suppose, over the amazing run of games that they have to start and still to go. As far as Maddison, same thoughts there, where I think the minutes so far and the performances so far have been really good. But then the next 2 fixtures, unfortunately, are Newcastle away and Arsenal at home. So the way I see it is that Maddison will definitely get a rise after these 2 fixtures are done. And then we can obviously reconsider how we feel about the hierarchy in this sort of 7-point-X position. With Bruno, he gets a drop. He's blank so far, right? I think we have to be honest and say that he hasn't really played up to his price point. He's dropped as well in price. But I don't think there's too much that has really changed with Bruno, other than the fact that, of course, you can now consider sort of very convenient moves. Like, let's say a lot of people have been going for the double move of Nkunku to Rodgers. Maybe if they have money in the bank, they've been able to go from Bruno to someone like Palmer. And I think that's a very, very strong move. Another sort of reason why I've dropped Bruno is simply because, game weeks 1 and 2 were good fixtures. Game week 3 is the poor one. So this is the type of game week where if you want to jump off of Bruno, this is a good week to do so. After that, though, game week 4, game week 5, these are good Bruno game weeks. I don't really think that my opinion on Bruno is going to suddenly dramatically change. He's not going to suddenly drop towards a differential pick unless his minutes as well continue to be really poor over the course of the season. I just think that maybe in the Brighton game, Ten Hag didn't really get what he wanted from his player. So you can see, earlier Rashford substitutions, earlier Bruno substitutions for someone like Scott McTominay, who's actually gone now to Napoli. As far as Odegaard, similar thoughts there, where once again, once you come off of these sort of Tottenham and Man City fixtures, Odegaard's just going to be going back towards a green pick, and then you make that consideration as an FPL manager as to whether you go for someone like Odegaard or someone like Havertz in the near term. As far as these sort of 9.x tier to the 10.x, these are all our premiums. Foden gets a drop because, once again, I think the sort of interrelationship with KDB is also just that you've come off the Ipswich at home fixture. Some of the fixtures in the short term aren't amazing, and then they get really good again in game week 7. So I feel like there's going to be a natural yo-yo for a lot of these players in these price points, and I think it's totally fine for you as an FPL manager to consider moving, game to game, sort of hopping on for players with good fixtures. So, for example, if you really wanted to go KDB last week, I think that always is justifiable. However, you can always see that there's a bit of downside, right? So when you go with someone like Son, some people consider the move Son to Foden, which is super unlucky and unlikely as well for such a drastic swing to happen. Because, of course, if you knew Foden was out for the fixture, you don't make that move. But if you knew Foden was going to start for Ipswich, it's a very strong move. I would still say on paper, despite how Everton looked very poor in game week 1. So I feel like the game already is sort of showing you how crazy swings are. A good example of that as well is just Son in game week 1, right? Extremely dull, nothing to sort of show about, but we know, of course, Son has his history. The history is underlying data. We can see it as well. The history is finishing, which you can see specifically for Foden and Son. Really, really high quality finishers. But I think that the key thing is you're going to get hurt sometimes in this FPL season, moving between some of these assets, and that's fine. But it still makes a lot of sense to back the fixtures. And that's simply my thoughts. Foden drops simply because of the sort of unavailability and sort of missing out on the Ipswich game. So there's a bit of a swing there and he drops. KDB still where he is. Saka, Son, Palmer still where they are as well. Son obviously just because Newcastle, Arsenal, the next 2 games are quite tough. And then you can reconsider sort of bringing Son back into your team if you want. With Saka, I find him a little bit more of a hold because I feel like he's definitely a captaincy option specifically for game week 6, right? I think holding Saka makes a lot of sense for managers because game weeks 3 and 4 are good fixtures, and then game week 5 is not exactly a great one. So maybe he actually drops around there, or maybe around game week 4 instead is where I drop Saka. But then suddenly you're hit with a wall where game week 6, actually Arsenal become amazing because 2 fixtures back to back for Arsenal are just incredible. So there's going to be a lot of yo-yo effects that you'll see. And I think it's not because I suddenly have changed my mind on Saka as a player, but simply because we're going to be playing the sort of fixture game with these premiums. Palmer, Salah still amazing, so no changes there, and Palmer projected to get a price rise as well. With the forward position moving over to that, João Pedro remains the king in the budget territory. Armstrong gets a drop because Southampton are actually investing into other forwards, and I think that just means slightly less minutes for him. We sort of thought maybe in the preseason something like 85, 90 minutes a game, but we also knew that there were some transfers sort of brought in. We also knew that Stewart was part of the squad. So as I said, within my sort of final game week 1 cheat sheet, I was a little bit lower on Armstrong than I was in let's say the preseason. So Armstrong, of course, sort of gets that drop to reflect the very early substitution, I would say, that we've seen already, which was a bit of a shock. I would still say which was still a little bit of a shock. With Welbeck, he's played so well that I think it's very hard to see him getting displaced as a starting striker for Brighton. So if you can sort of pony up and sort of deal with the game week 3 fixture, the reality is if he plays game weeks 4 and 5 and starts for the team as the main man versus Ipswich and Nottingham Forest, these are great games. It's a good run of form. But of course, you have to understand that Evan Ferguson's already back in the squad. João Pedro is also another player who can play in the 9 position, and you have Rutter as well playing the 10. So arguably Welbeck, I guess I wouldn't say his days are numbered so fast, but you have to sort of be cognizant that maybe this is a very short-term transfer if you're moving into Welbeck. I'm just trying to adjust for the priority of how good the games are based on how many minutes I think he'll play, so which is why he gets a rise. With Strand Larson, it seems like he's actually continuously playing games, continuously starting games, but of course I'm a little bit lower on him because he's not on penalties and he does play for Wolves. Now Wolves actually played 2 really good performances so far versus Arsenal and Chelsea. I thought they deserved to definitely score versus Arsenal as well, which is actually, that's very impressive. So with Strand Larson playing good, consistent minutes, if we actually think that Wolves will improve as an offense, because they don't really look great as a defense, let's be honest, Strand Larson is definitely going to be a very interesting pick for the rest of the season. Vardy gets a drop because I did sort of hint towards this last week, but he is a very old or sort of aging player, and it's very likely that some of these players cannot meet the demands of playing week to week in the Premier League. And last week we saw a 70-minute substitution, which seemed like it was needed. And I think that's something that could sort of tell this general story of Vardy for the course of the season, which is why he drops. Probably because I've overestimated his minutes a little bit. As far as the 6.x picks, no changes to Muniz. I've actually introduced Evan Nilsson and Nketiah. Now, I don't think Nketiah is necessarily going to start as soon as Game Week 3. I think it'll take some time for him to sort of find his way towards starting the team. But a lot of money has been invested in Nketiah, and they also have some other rotation pieces like Kamada as well, who will play within the sort of 3 attacking spots. It's either sort of the dual 10 setup or maybe 2 strikers and then Eze in behind. But generally speaking, of course, Nketiah is definitely one to look at this sort of price point, just generally speaking. As far as Evan Nilsson, it seems like he'll be first on penalties. And as long as Enes Ünal is still out of the team, I think has really, really good minutes. And so for a Bournemouth attacker, for a team where I would say Irola definitely coaches up the team on attack, and we've already seen that so far with Solanke, that I think I've got good signs and positive feelings about someone like Evan Nilsson as well. As far as someone like Wood, he gets a little bit of a drop because I think ultimately we're starting to see that Awani is eating it into more of his minutes. The fixtures are also getting, generally speaking, worse. So he gets a small drop. No other changes really in the other price points other than a small Mateta drop as well and a Solanke drop as well, just to reflect the injury. So I'm not sure about Solanke coming back for Game Week 3. We'll find out news very shortly. However, we've already been discussing about how Solanke was to sell if we knew that he was out of the team. And unfortunately, of course, with, let's say, maybe a little bit of doubt on his minutes for Game Week 3 with the international break around the corner and then Arsenal after that, Solanke is definitely one of those picks who, just like Maddison, will actually get a huge surge once we get out of Game Week 4. And therefore, the sort of yo-yo effect comes back. As far as someone like Mateta, I just think ultimately, over the course of the season, with someone like Nketiah in the team, as I said, with Kamada as well being a part of the squad, with players like Sarr being a part of the squad, it's possible that we might actually see Mateta not necessarily start every single fixture. I feel like that could be a small possibility. What if there are fixtures where, let's say, we're seeing Nketiah come in and sort of, take the minutes from Mateta a little bit away, and then we see Kamada and Eze within the team? I think that's plausible as well. It's not necessarily the case that I think the default sort of starting 3 for Crystal Palace up top is going to be Nketiah, Mateta, and Eze. So because of that, I think with one more capable attacker, much better than Edouard, Tubans, and Nketiah, that Mateta will get a slight knock-on impact on his overall minutes. And I think that's going to be why I'm a little bit cooler on Mateta for now. As far as Watkins, he deserves a rise. Yes, of course, the minutes so far have been really poor, and you don't want to see that as someone who owns Watkins or someone who's actually looking to invest into Watkins. But I have to say that I can't really see him losing or being a consistent 65-minute substitution. I think you could sort of downgrade him to the territory of where he's now considered an 80 to 85-minute player. And I still think over this run of games, he's a very, very valuable asset to generally consider, because it's hard to sort of also evaluate how bad Watkins can really go as a pick, right? When you have effectively 7 good fixtures in a row, what can I say? You're probably going to be a green pick. As far as the defense, moving over to that, I've talked about Nedeljkovic a lot, and I think that the big thing once again is that Aston Villa seemingly was going to go for Gio Trouda for the transfer window, but it seems like that deal is not close to finalizing. And because the deadline will actually, finalize first in the transfer window aspect of things compared to FPL, you will get the information of whether or not Nedeljkovic is actually a very, very good pick. I would say tentatively, even if he gets 3-4 fixtures in a row, that's more value than you'll ever be able to get out of another 4.0. Now, this could also put you once again into another Barco situation where I'm not expecting him to actually move out of the Premier League. But the reality is, of course, if cash comes back, you're going to be dealing with less minutes for someone like the right back here. And of course, that's going to be a bit of a problem point. So when you go for a 4.0 pick, you're probably picking them to be your 15th player, someone who you really don't expect to have to call upon. But if you need, let's say, an emergency third sub, that they're there. And that, I suppose, is the issue, right? Do you value the value play of going for 3 to 4 fixtures in a row with Aston Villa defense with really good fixtures? Or do you value someone like Mosquera, who's probably going to play consistently, but maybe ultimately is playing for a really weak team that you never really want to be starting for? And with Johnson, he gets a small rise with Ipswich's sort of turn of fixtures. In the 4.5 position, I've given Colwill a rise. I think we're much more comfortable about his minutes. I think ultimately that left-hand side of Chelsea feels a little bit locked down now in terms of Cucurella and Colwill. We also know that within the European games, that's a good opportunity for them to rotate, where someone like Colwill and Cucurella, as I said, should be playing much more minutes within the Premier League because they're not actually actively involved in more important cups. So I think Colwill definitely gets a rise. You might argue that Chelsea have looked like a really poor defense so far, and I think that's totally fine. But I think for them to actually completely drop off the cliff as a defense over a good run of games, I'd probably disagree with you there. Ultimately, they've only played 2 fixtures so far. I don't think you need to sort of overwrite the narrative entirely for the defense. Konsa, Dunk, Lewis, these are picks who are all fantastic still. Lewis still carries an asterisk because I think every week you're going to be dealing with a little bit of doubt. Yes, Lewis is fantastic. Yes, I own Lewis. Yes, I want to continue playing Lewis, but can I be 100% sure that Lewis is the type of pick that is long-lasting in FPL team right now? Absolutely not. We need more information. And that's why he always comes with a bit of an asterisk, because I think he's a risky transfer. With Van de Ven, I think actually, if anything, what we've seen so far from a team like Spurs this season is that we shouldn't be that low on their defense. So I've given them a bit of a rise here, even though the next two fixtures are very, very poor. Burn, Hall have also dropped because I think I'm starting to feel a little bit worse about Newcastle. We also saw Hall benching the other week, which already shows the impact of having Lloyd Kelly as a depth option within the team. But yeah, I don't think I've been infused, generally speaking, so far with Newcastle defense. You've come off of two of the good fixtures. Even though Tottenham home is prospectively a great game, do I see them actually keeping a clean sheet? Probably not. So that's sort of where I'm at with Newcastle. I might even feel the same about Man United, but I think I'm still going to give them the benefit of the doubt. We have the Ugarte deal coming in as well, which hopefully will shore up their defense a little bit and upgrade it just a little bit so that they can sort of remain in that territory. With Mykolenko, once again, similar signs where without Brantwaite, they just look a little bit lost as a team. I can't imagine it's just one player. I think it's the loss of Onana as well. But generally speaking, the early signs from Everton have been absolutely horrible, which is also why Mykolenko drops. In the 5.0 position, I think you can probably hold the same sort of argument towards Crystal Palace so far. Munoz gets a drop for that reason. Udogi's still in his same spot despite the two tough fixtures. Cucurella definitely gets a rise. I just think, though, that Cucurella is one of the few fullbacks in the game where he is a very tidy player and he's very good for a football team. But is he very good for an FPL team? I'm not necessarily set on that. Whilst he's quite like Zinchenko in the sense that he can actually very quickly reach the passing bonus because he's such a progressive player, he's such a key hub of the team and how they sort of play at the back and how they progress the ball. But outside of, let's say, the passing bonus aspect of things, Cucurella is not that offensive of a fullback. So there's definitely a sort of con towards Cucurella. And that's why I just prefer someone like Colwell if you're just going to have Chelsea rotation within your team. In the other positions, the only premium change has been that Van Dijk drops. You're now looking at two fixtures being chalked off, two really good fixtures being chalked off. Robertson still very, very much high in my priority, but then Van Dijk, as I said, with Liverpool actually looking slightly better as a defense. I think that's a very early promising sign for Liverpool, but ultimately the fixtures are going to get slowly worse. And Van Dijk does get a drop ahead of the curve because I feel like I'd put him in the same sort of spot in terms of my consideration as Saliba, right? When you have a slightly tougher fixture here in Man United away. So that's sort of the change of the guard here in terms of Liverpool's fixtures getting slightly worse in the medium term. And then obviously Arsenal's fixtures going to get slightly better very quickly, but we can't adjust to that until probably after that Man City fixture. So as far as the goalkeepers, just rounding off things quickly, to sort of reflect what I've said so far, I've taken Sa out of the cheat sheet because of course we know that they've already signed another goalkeeper. As far as Henderson, Pickford, the drops are just reflecting what I sort of mentioned with Crystal Palace and Everton so far. With Leno, I think I've given him a rise because I feel like I probably have to give my credits to Leno. He's one of the best shot stoppers in the world. We've already had plenty of underlying data suggesting that. I probably underpriced him, I think, at the start of the game in terms of, or undervalued him at the start of the game. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of the cheat sheet. I still think Martinez, Fleck, and Sells, the premium tier teams are still the absolute best, particularly with Liverpool actually improving so far on a lot of metrics on defense. But that's something, and that is a story that we'll sort of continue to monitor as we head into the international break, as we get more games of information. But that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching the cheat sheet. A little bit of a long one. I just feel like it's nice on a game week 3 to have more information, be more comfortable speaking about movements within the cheat sheet as well. And hopefully we'll see some more changes that will make the FPL experience a little bit more dynamic. So thank you guys so much for watching once again. Take care and goodbye, and I'll see you guys soon.